A very good day to you and welcome to the Morning Latte Game Changer program, proudly brought to you by Conrad Adenauer Stiftung. In the words of Nelson Mandela, safety and security don't just happen, but they're a result of collective effort and public investment. We owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens of our society, a life free of violence and fear. Today we're celebrating the Day of the African Child, and I'm sure most of you are wondering, why do we celebrate the Day of the African Child? The Day of the African Child is observed annually on June the 16th, and it honors the memories of students who were massacred in Soweto, South Africa in 1976 for protesting against education injustice and inequality. Today, or this year's theme, is eliminating harmful practices affecting children, looking at the progress on policy and practice since 2013. Today, we'll be discussing how far we've come as a country in eliminating harmful practices affecting children with some phenomenal people. For example, we're going to be having the Harare Junior Mayor, Jabulani, who is going to be speaking to us a little bit about the work they're doing in junior parliament. And at the same time, we're going to have Samantha Biri, who is from Ward 24. She's a junior honorable who's going to be talking to us a little bit about what they've been doing to eliminate harmful practices, as well as young people who are representing children's rights organization, as well as leaders who are at the forefront of empowering young people. This is going to be a program with a difference, and I do hope that you enjoy.
Hello everyone, my name is Ruvarashika GT and I am from ZNCWC, that is Zimbabwe National Council for the Welfare of Children.
Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Biri. I'm an honorable councillor, Harare City Council.
Okay, today we have an interesting topic which we are going to be talking about. This is a topic that we are going to be discussing about. It is the harmful practices that children are facing and youths that are facing in Zimbabwe.
That's an interesting topic, Rua. So what exactly do you understand from the topic at hand?
Initially, when we are talking about the harmful practices that is going on, we are talking about the child marriages that are going on in our country, the sexual exploitation that is happening to children. You tend to find that there are certain people in our society that still believe that if a man is HIV positive and they sleep with a girl who has albinism, apparently it takes away the HIV. And this is a myth, to be honest, because this exposes the young albinism girl to be exposed to HIV. And you tend to find these are some of the harmful practices that are going on in our communities because people are not learned or not taught about these type of myths. And we also have the ritual practices that has been going on in our communities. You tend to find the issue of Teboa Makore, which went on last year, whereby his uncle actually sacrificed him for ritual purposes. We have so many cases that are going on in our country, but then just because they are not being reported or not being spoken of, it does not mean that they're not happening.
Indeed, that's so true. For example, the issue of child labor, which has really risen due to the issue of COVID-19, where people are opting to employ their children just to make money. Did you know that Zimbabwe is number 6 out of 197 countries practicing child labor?
Oh my gosh.
That is quite devastating to me.
Very.
It is, because, we expect that children are going to school. I mean, the government enacted a law that the minimum level of education should be 16, and yet children are going to work. They're panning for gold, herding cattle. I mean, what are your views on that issue?
I feel like when it comes to issue of child labor, it becomes a contradicting issue whereby a parent will say, I am sending my child to do work. And at the same time, a child cannot refuse what they are sent to do just because of the law. You get what I'm saying? Pakuti, this is my child, and I have to send my child to help me around with chores. And there's a certain extent of level where we can say this is child labor and this is a parent actually just, teaching their children chores or, things around the house. But you tend to find that children are waking up as early as 3 o'clock just to go fetch water. And you find a 14-year-old carrying a 20-liter bucket, just to get water. So now are we saying, is this child labor, or is this a girl doing her chores? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
so now we have to now come to an understanding on whether, is there a certain level where we can say this is child labor or this is not?
According to research, child labor is working kids between the ages of 13 to 17 for more than 6 hours a day.
Okay.
Now, people need to assess that. And then we've got issues of child marriages, early child marriages. Zimbabwe is number 41 in the world. I mean, that's bad. And you find that the perpetrators are usually religious leaders, parents. Like you were saying, it becomes an issue where the parent believes that this is how I was raised. And it's a challenge to, trying to fix that becomes a challenge to the government. We've got drug abuse going on. And let's be honest, when lockdown was first introduced, a lot of people found it hard to adjust. Isolation. I mean, I'm a people's person. I'm used to talking to people every single day. And now when I have to be alone, you start thinking about a lot, don't you?
Yeah, true. When it comes to child marriages, it brings us from poverty to start with, and also to religion and culture. You tend to find that if a religious, a church leader wakes up and say, "Ndakarota mwana wenyu achirorwa," with a certain elder, parents are now forced to adhere to this because this is the leader that we are talking about, and people have got so much beliefs that they go on with. So now they are forced to actually adhere to this dream and marry off their children whilst they are young. And with child marriages, it becomes an issue whereby there are multiple problems that comes with it. Not only is there school dropouts, but there's also high chances that these young girls can actually, have stillbirth, because, a child is still developing and they might not even be able to, to carry a child. Do you get what I'm saying? So that becomes a major problem in our society. And how then can we actually, advise people not to practice these acts when it is so deep that this is a belief? It is difficult to tell somebody not to do something that they already believe in.
Exactly.
That becomes a problem. All right, so you mentioned that you are in Ward 16, for maybe 24, which is Hatfield, right?
Yes.
So what are you doing in council, like as junior councillors? Have you reached out to certain children, or have you addressed certain issues to do with harmful practices that are going on in societies?
Okay, it's quite true that there are a lot of issues that are affecting our youth today, especially, like I mentioned, because of COVID. So us as Junior Council, we have mainly been focusing on the drug abuse, because that has really increased. It's been there've been really large numbers, and it leads to a lot of mental health issues. So we're looking at starting a campaign, Above the Influence campaign, where we are, basically giving people awareness. Because when there's no awareness of certain acts happening in society, that's when you find a lot of people practicing those acts. And the excuses are, we didn't know. So we are focusing on a lot of these issues, basically mental health, because mental health touches on everything we just covered right now. So yeah, that's what we're doing as council.
Yes, and then maybe for future purposes, maybe we can engage the government and religious leaders, that have to do with the lawmaking. Maybe they can have a conversation so that, the beliefs and culture do not crash with the law. Because in as much as we would like to have culture, we also must be aware that we are guided by laws. Yes.
Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Jabulani Charamba. I am the junior mayor for the city of Harare.
I am Tinotenda Chimbindi, former town clerk for the city of Harare and child advocate at Zimbabwe National Council for the Welfare of Children. So I think in light of the Day of the African Child 2022, it's an honor to be sitting with the current sitting mayor of Harare, because issues around, child marriages, harmful practices, to just bracket those things, yes, they're on the rise. So looking at the theme, eliminating harmful practices against children, What do you think, as the mayor, are these harmful practices? Do they even exist? What are we talking about when we're having this conversation?
That's a good question. But I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What harmful practices are you taking?
I want you, as the sitting mayor,
Okay.
to just probably highlight to us, as we look at the theme,
Okay.
what are we talking about when we are saying there are harmful practices around children? What do we need to eliminate? What are these harmful practices?
So we need to start by defining what harmful practices are. Yes.
Exactly.
And the basic definition of a harmful practice is something that will hurt you, something that will cause distraction to you, right? So when we're eliminating harmful practices in children, we're trying to eradicate everything that would maybe destroy or defer the upbringing of a child, right?
Okay.
So these include issues like drug abuse, issues like mental health, issues like, people take this for granted, but heartbreak from dating. That is a very harmful practice. If you think about it.
Okay. So allow me to broaden this a bit.
Yes.
I am once a town clerk of Harare.
Okay, yes.
But now I'm at community level, just a general young person, but working with young people, noticing the ill practices and everything that's happening.
Yes.
And I would like to list down some of the harmful practices that we are seeing from the communities that we are working with.
All right.
The harmful practices, like you can talk of child marriages, right?
Yes,
that's one of the most over talked about topic, but still burning. We can talk about issues to do with female genital mutilation. We can talk about virginity testing. We can talk about some practices like the so-called bond way, where a man is not forced actually, but per tradition, a man can marry his wife's sister or can engage in sexual activities with his wife's sister. And probably there are a list.
There's a list.
And most of them, you see that they're happening in most of the marginalized communities.
Of course.
So we are looking probably outside Harare, we are looking outside the urban cities. We are looking at those in marginalized areas.
Of course.
Do you think enough is being done to address those disadvantaged children who are being part of these ill practices that are happening in those areas?
You know what I realized? Zimbabwe is indeed largely rural. So you see that sometimes we live in this bubble where we're protected by Instagram and Twitter because we're in Harare. But now that you've brought it to the rural areas, I'd like to say, they're not paid much attention to, because these issues that you're talking about, child marriages, don't happen in Harare as much. They are not paid attention to because they are not in the spotlight. They're not in the camera. They're not in the newspaper headlines, right? So enough is not being done to address those issues. This is why, like you said when you asked me this question, child marriage is one of the most talked about issues.
Yes.
Right? We talk about it because we know it's there, but it's not affecting us in the urban area. So we're not hands-on with it. And I feel like a lot more attention and focus should be put there, right? Take, for example, the new policy that was set about changing the age of consent, sexual consent from 16 to 18, right? They spoke about it on ZBC. They spoke about it on Twitter, right? That's where we go. But what about those kids in high school that have been having sex already but don't have access to electricity or Wi-Fi? They really don't know that the rules have changed, right? So what does that mean for them? What do you think then that means for them? Yes.
So from what you're saying, I am highlighting a gap which you're pointing out. And probably this gap is coming from the way probably the policies or the laws are cascaded down to the children or to everyone else at the grassroots.
Yes.
Because you are saying, like you were mentioning that it was noise was made on Twitter, on ZBC. It was talked about. I think you were mentioning about the alignment of the age of sexual consent.
Yes.
The newly enacted law. Yes. Is it a law or is it a bill now?
It was a bill, but I think they're going to make it a law soon.
Okay. Yes. So the challenge is it getting to everyone.
Yes.
Okay. So probably what can you basically say from our perspective as young people?
Yes.
You probably having a step forward. Yes. Because you are in a child-based structure which actually has influence to actually have some office bearers who can change certain things, listen to you. What do you think should be done so that the information reaches everyone?
Everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. before I answer that, I want to put it in a more communal perspective, something that everyone can relate to. Have you ever played broken telephone?
Yeah, yeah.
You know how you know how the leader says something and
Yes.
then the last person ends up
Exactly.
saying, yeah, like, can I have a biscuit? But by the time it goes this, yeah, Tino stole my biscuit.
Exactly,
Yeah, and
exactly.
everybody's
It's
mad.
distorted and
Yeah.
everything.
So we need to fix that chain of communication. That's the first thing that we need to work on, right? We need to bear in mind that when we are communicating something, right? Like, for example, our conversation, right? Suppose it was being recorded, right? And we wanted to broadcast it out. We need to make sure that our target audience is not only the people near us, but we need to make an effective change to so that even the person whom does not have access to a TV today gets to hear that Tino was expressing concerns about my welfare as well. You understand?
Yeah,
That's the first thing that we need to do. And I think the best way to do that is approaching the people that can help us. And these are our seniors, right? Our adults. But the question is, are they ready to have a conversation where they can listen to children telling them that we understand that you're concerned about our age of sexual consent, right? We also understand that you're concerned about our age of marriage. Because in as much as we might shift the age of consent and everything, right? It becomes harmful to us in the sense that they're not actually, teaching us this. They don't include the sexual education in the curriculum. So even if you shift it, when I do get to 18, do I know how to use protection for sex so that I don't get HIV? That's a conversation they're not ready to have, to educate us. All they think is barring us or raising the age is like something that will eradicate all our problems as children. But let me ask you a question from a communal perspective, right? With all these harmful practices that are going on, right? So we have child marriages, we have drug abuse. What then do you think, how then do you think the country has progressed in setting up the policies from 2013 up to where we are today?
That's a very good question. I think in terms of policies, in terms of laws, we have very, very good laws in place.
All right.
Though some of them are still in the pipeline, still being aligned and all of that. Because when we look at probably the Marriages Act,
Yes.
it's a good act when you look at protecting children. We look at, probably it's now a good act,
Right.
seeing the recent changes and all of that. We look at the Gender-Based Violence Act,
Okay.
it's a good act.
Well, what does the Gender-Based Violence Act talk about? Or
When
how
we-
does it like help children?
When we look at the Gender-Based Violence Act, we are looking at the harmful practices which are happening down to the homestead.
All right.
So per se, we look at something like virginity testing.
All right.
It might seem like it's something normal to some situations or some communities because they've grown to know it as something that happens when you have for probably 3-4 girls in your homestead. At some point, you need to check, is she still a virgin or what's going on and all of that. It's something that has been normalized, but it's not normal.
Alright.
It's abuse to the girl child.
Alright.
So when we look at now the act, the GBV Act, it protects the girl child against things like that. Then we also have probably the recently enacted law around age of consent and all of that. Those are all laws that we have and policies. But I think the challenge comes on implementation.
All right.
The laws are there.
Yes.
They are being worked on. But when we then go to the ground, after seeing the law being there, what's being done to make sure that we respect and promote the law of the country, especially to protect these children?
So I think just to summarize this, as Zimbabwe, we do have, good country laws. We do pay attention to these things, right, on paper. But
Yeah.
I think what we need to work on more is implementation, from communication of breakdown laws and actually enforcing the proper laws.
Exactly.
That's what I picked from this conversation.
Exactly. I always like this in advocacy because I always highlight and say this: less grammar and more action. The moment we put the grammar on the paper, let's make sure that we now have action on the ground. Then we have progress as a country.
Definitely.
We had young people talking about the different challenges that they're facing. And as I say, today is a different program altogether as we're putting young people's voices at the forefront of development. You know, so many times young people's voices are thwarted, or, you know, they are not looked at with relevance. And today on the Day of the African Child, it's all about celebrating the African child, looking at the challenges that they're facing and how we can find solutions. Right now with me, I have Timukudze Hungwe, who's the legal officer at Grow Up Zimbabwe, to tell us a little bit about the policies at hand. We already had the junior mayor and honorable, and of course young people who are actively involved in the community in fighting for children's rights, talking about, you know, less talk and more implementation. Everything looks perfect on paper, but what's really happening on the ground? Timukudze, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me on the Day of the African Child. Very excited. Let's talk a little bit about the policies that have been put in place. We know that we already had, you know, the young people talking about, you know, they are policies that look perfect on paper, but really they're not being implemented. What is the biggest challenge there?
Okay, so one of the challenges is that the lawmakers, they are not following through in taking action and breaking it down and bringing the law into the community. Because what you see is when you talk about the law, for a lay person, she or he won't be able to understand what the law is because we use terms that are very big. And for someone who doesn't understand law, he won't be able to understand what we're talking about. So it is important then that as lawmakers, we create maybe a policy where we break down the law so that someone who's in the community, when he has let's say age of consent, he understands what's that, it's harmful cultural practices, it's what that, because a harmful cultural practice is something that is normal to them. For us, we are saying it's harmful, it's a harmful cultural practice, but to them, this is a day-to-day thing that is very normal.
So as we're obviously saying that we have this lack of implementation, and this has, of course, sort of increased the harmful practices that we've been seeing over the past few years. Let's look at some harmful practices that the young people have already mentioned. For example, we've seen that you know, issues to do with drug abuse have been on the rise right now. We see that issues to do with child marriages have still, been continuing as much as we have different policies that have been put in place. What do you think can be done to sort of fight against drug abuse and child marriages, as well as female genital mutilation? I mean, we've seen different cases in different cultures within our country as well.
Okay, so I think it's important to understand that there's always an underlying reason to why we get to the point where there are child marriages or where there's drug abuse. For example, poverty. Poverty affects child marriages, affects drug abuse. So then it's important to address this somewhat minor issues and say, okay, fine, there's an issue of poverty that's leading young youth to engage in drug abuse, that's forcing parents to send off their children to marriage when they're still young. So as a nation, we should now come in and say, okay, fine, let's empower the people economically. Let's empower the girl child to be able to go back to school and not say, no, only a boy can go to school and the girl has to stay at home doing the dishes, doing the day-to-day chores.
Thank you so much. That was Timukudze Hungwe from Grow Up Zimbabwe. She's the legal advisor. As we're talking about, you know, the policies that have been put in place, yet everything looks perfect on paper, but the implementation aspect is a real challenge. In a little bit, we'll have Tazimadzima, who is the director and founder of Ignite Youth Organization, who's also putting young people at the forefront of development. Welcome back to our last segment of the Morning Latte Game Changer, proudly brought to you by Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. If you're just joining us, we're celebrating the Day of the African Child, which is the 16th of June, and that's today. And of course, we're focusing on the theme eliminating harmful practices affecting children, looking at the progress on policy and practice since 2013. Right now, I have with me Tazimadzima, who is the founder of Ignite Youth Organization. They have for over 5 years now been putting young people at the forefront of development. Tazi, how are you today?
I'm well, thanks.
Thanks so much for joining me for this conversation. So we obviously had young people talking about, you know, the challenges that they're facing and so much more. But what are the successes and challenges so far? We've talked about policy, why policy looks so good on paper, yet it's not being implemented. But let's not just look at the dark side, but have we been seeing some successes so far?
All right, thank you, Unique, for that question. So yes, there are some successes. We've seen that there are a lot of policies that the government has passed in terms of protecting children over the past couple of decades. But the issue, I think, always comes back to the implementation part of things, where we're not really seeing the implementation on the ground. So the successes are really coming from CSOs, individuals, activists, advocates, taking that responsibility upon their shoulders and making sure that there's an actual implementation that's taking place on the ground. And what we see is that, you know, a lot of CSOs and other organizations, individuals have taken that responsibility. They go and they make sure awareness is taking place at the grassroots level. The communities are being educated and informed of what it means. So I think passing the laws, we see a lot of that happening on paper, but the actual implementation is where we see the biggest challenge. And I think that is where we need an improvement. That when a law or a bill is passed, it's attached together with a clear implementation plan. But one of the reasons why the execution is proving to be difficult is because when that law is passed, not enough engagement is being done to actually get the people that are going to implement this law involved in the making of that policy. So with the policy making process, if you don't engage the people that are supposed to implement it, they're not going to participate in the implementation. So in the creation of that process, they need citizen participation, they need communities, religious institutions, people that are affected and also part of perpetrating or creating that situation all need to be engaged so that they are aware of what is happening and why it's important for them to implement it. So without that knowledge, people are just going to continue behaving as they were because they don't understand it, they don't know it, or maybe they know it, but they're not going to abide to it because there are no clear, implications outlined as to what happens if that law is broken.
I think that's such a very important point that you just made, Tazi, talking about the gatekeepers and helping them really understand the implications of if they don't sort of initiate the policy, or at the same time just really helping the leaders understand the policy at hand. What can be done? And for example, civil society organizations such as yourselves, what have you been doing to make sure that, you know, we are on that path to eliminate harmful practices?
I think the most important thing, and what we do as well as an organization, is to try and break down that language into a language that the ordinary person can understand. Because the way it's written right now, you can't expect a 16-year-old to understand what that means. Because for them, they are confused. What does even age of consent mean? When we're talking about the age of consent changing, what does the Constitutional Court really, what does it mean when the Constitutional Court makes this ruling? What are the implications for me? So for them, this language is really like, it's very difficult for them to understand it. So what we are doing as an organization is we are raising awareness and about the laws that are being passed to protect children. But we're breaking it down in a language that the young people can understand. And we're also showing them why it's important for them, why this law is important for them, and why it's created to protect them. It's for their benefit. It's not to destroy them. It's not to, take away their rights, but it's actually to enforce and help them so that they can actually have a better future. So I think the most important thing is to break it down not only to the children, but the community that surrounds the children. That's their parents, the churches, institutions, schools, teachers. Everyone needs to play a part in making sure that that message gets to the children and also to the people that help with the children when it comes to decision making.
Well, that was Tazi Mazima, who is the founder and director of Ignite Youth Organization, an organization that is passionate about putting young people at the forefront of development and giving young people a voice. Today we were celebrating the Day of the African Child. What role can you play in your community to make sure that the African child is protected, and what role can you play in eliminating harmful practices? Remember, this program was proudly brought to you by Conrad Adenauer Stiftung, and we'll see you next time.